Our final book of the New Testament that we will cover is the book of Hebrews. Now again, we have the same question that we have with James, is whether or not this is actually a letter or something else. In a sense, it's not a letter because it doesn't start like a letter. Most letters begin by saying who's writing and who they're writing to, and an introduction and a prayer and so on. None of those things are present in the beginning of the book of Hebrews. However, the end of the book of Hebrews does end a little bit more like a prayer with a thanksgiving and a greeting and then an ending. So, is it a letter? We don't know. It seems that it could be a letter, but the problem that we face is that we have no idea who wrote it. What we find is that in the early church, they believed it was written by Paul. That Paul himself had written Hebrews as well, and so is the 14th letter. But now most scholars would disagree with that. Most scholars would say that Paul didn't write the book of Hebrews. And the reason why is because of its Jewishness. It is a very Jewish letter, even though it's written by somebody who most probably had Greek as their first language. So on one hand, it assumes a very high understanding of the Old Testament, of the Tanakh, plus of Jewish tradition. So it's got Jewish tradition, it's got Jewish custom, it has got lots of Tanakh scriptures as part of understanding it. But it's written in a Greek which is very good. It's a very good Greek. In fact, to some degree, the Greek's even better than Paul's. Now, how we put those together, we're not sure. So, is it Paul who wrote it? Well, it doesn't sound like Paul. The vocabulary that's in it, the literary style, is not the same as the other letters that we can claim to be Paul's letters. Of course, Paul could have had it written by someone else. Paul could have given or dictated at least some of it, and then the secretary that was writing may have written it down in another way. And so some people believe that, therefore, the writer was more that secretary. Some believe that it could have been Barnabas, that Barnabas could have been the writer. Others claim that it could be Peter. Now, it's unlikely that it's Peter, again, because of the high level of Greek that is, or just the ability of writing that it had. However, the connection to the Jewish world and to Jewish customs really tells you that it most probably somebody who did have a connection to the Jewish world. And not only to the Jewish world, but to a particular part of the Jewish world, and that is the Levites, which again would connect very well with Barnabas, because Barnabas came from a Levite family. Now, why do we say a Levite family? Well, because Hebrews is the one place where Jesus is called the high priest. The high priest. And it has all the customs connected with the high priesthood connected into it. However, the interesting part is that, of course, the priests and the Levites up to that time used to connect to the temple. But the temple's not mentioned in Hebrew. It's rather the tent of meeting, or the tabernacle, that is actually mentioned within the book of Hebrews. Now, why was that the case? We don't know. But possibly it's connected to the fact that the temple has already been destroyed. That the temple of Herod has been destroyed, that this letter is written after 70 AD. And so therefore, because the temple is destroyed, in a sense the writer refers back to the tabernacle, because the tabernacle was never destroyed. The tabernacle gave them the connection into the past, and allowed that past to continue to live even through the destruction of the temple. I think that those things are part and parcel of Hebrews. And I think that just like Origen said, there's no way that we're ever going to find out who exactly wrote the book of Hebrews. Maybe what we'll need to do is to wait until one day we are gathered up together in order to be able to find that out. But does it matter? Well, it matters in the sense of this, that it gives us some connection in terms of timing. What has begun to happen, or at least what seems to be happening in the book of Hebrews, is that the Jews had become Christians, were now wavering. We're now getting to that point, because Jesus hadn't come again so soon, because of the persecution that they were receiving, that they were beginning to waver in their commitment to Christianity. And were thinking about going back to becoming just Jews. They were going back into the old covenant, into the old concepts of Scripture. And what the book of Hebrews does is writing to them to say, no, stand firm in what you believed before. We need to acknowledge about who Jesus is, that in fact Jesus is greater than Moses. He's greater than Joshua. He's greater than all those who have gone before. He is, in fact, the one who is our high priest, the one who stands for us. The other thing that it's doing as well is it's coming against the old methodologies of doing Judaism, the things of animal sacrifice and the sacrificial system that was under that. That in a sense what the writer of Hebrews is trying to do is to say that that system now is defunct. That system could never save you anyway, but in fact now has been superseded by the work and the person of Jesus. It's those concepts that Hebrews wants to bring out most forcefully. Of course, the greatest verse in the book of Hebrews is Hebrews 11, verse 1, which gives us the most simple version of the concept of what faith is. And then spends the rest of chapter 11 telling us about the different persons throughout the Tanakh who had faith, a faith that believed in something which they did not see, and yet what they continued to hope for. And that's really what we see within Hebrews, is that even in the midst of suffering, even in the midst of persecution, the one thing that keeps us going is hope, is the belief that God is still in control, the belief that Jesus did come to save us, the belief that in fact, even if we don't see it, we can see that God is in control of that situation of life. It's those concepts of hope and celebration that comes through Hebrews. But it is a difficult book to read. It's a difficult book to understand. In fact, some commentators would call it a puzzle. And unfortunately, it's a puzzle where we don't have the picture already there so that we know how to make the puzzle. It's a puzzle with many thousands of pieces, but in fact, we don't know what the final picture looks like. And in some ways, for each of us, that picture may look slightly different once we finish the puzzle. It's part of the joy of the diversity that these books offer to us. So when you read the book of Hebrews, remind yourself that it is written in a context. Remind yourself that it is written in a context of custom and tradition and perspective. And once we can do that, that helps us to interpret it and connect it for us. That even in the midst of our wavering, even in the midst of our doubt, the thing that can help us and keep us going is hope. The hope of God and hoping in Jesus Christ, His Son.